What does it take to write £1,000,000 checks to founders with nothing but an idea? In this episode, we sit down with Reece, founder of Concept Ventures, a 65 million pre-seed fund, the largest in the UK and possibly Europe.
To be a really good pre-seed investor, you need to have conviction when others don't.
In a world where most VCs want proof before they invest, Reece of Concept Ventures is taking a radically different approach.
You can't be writing 200, 300K. You need to be leading around with $1 million off the gate.
It's a high-stakes strategy that seasoned investors called insane.
$65 million pre-seed, I think that's probably definitely the biggest in the UK, if not Europe.
But when everyone doubted his contrarian model, something unexpected happened.
Our lead rate's actually 90% on this fund.
The results? Founders who partner with Concept are skipping entire funding rounds.
The rounds allow founders at pre-seed to essentially, if they do really well, skip a round of dilution.
What's the fundamental flaw Reece identified in European venture capital that nobody else was willing to address?
People not building their own conviction. So I think there's so much reliance in our industry on signaling.
Join us for an inside look at how Concept Ventures is rewriting the rules of pre-seed investing in Europe, and why their conviction-first approach might just be the blueprint for the next generation of venture capital.
Their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, I have what I hope will soon become a good new friend, because I have Reece with me from Concept Ventures. And Reece, we were introduced by, I don't know if it wants to be known that he introduced us, but a mutual friend who's very much in AI. And he said, Andreas, you need to talk to this guy. You need to talk to this guy. You need to talk to this guy. And all of them I said, I've already had them on the podcast, my friend. And then he mentioned you. And then serendipitously, we end up also having you nominated as one of the nominees for the Emerging Manager of the Year award at the EUVC Awards. So I was like, amazing. This came in just a couple of days before this recording. So I think this is destined to be, Reece.
That's very kind.
Yeah.
And thank you for the nomination. I'm not sure where it came from. So,
I don't know either, actually. I didn't check that up. I just saw your name there and I thought, what a beautiful matchup.
There you go. But great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining, Reece. So, Reece, as said, I didn't know about you. And I don't know whether that says something about me living under a rock sometimes or what, but tell me, let's talk everything about Concept Ventures. But before we go there, maybe just do the quick intro on yourself as well.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And, I've listened to the podcast for many years and you've had some great guests. So really, really excited to be here. And yeah, look, in terms of my background, I started my career in investing when I was very, very young. And I've talked about this many times, where essentially I saved a little bit of my pocket money and various other kind of paper rounds and summer jobs. And I invested in very stupidly my life savings into a company called Apple when I was 13 years old. It wasn't very much, but yeah. And because at the time, people that used Apple products had things called Firewires. And Andreas, you might be old enough to remember what a Firewire is. And people laughed at me. And so that was kind of the start of my technology investing career. And I was obsessed with technology.
I don't know the Apple journey with years. For some years, for some reason, I'm super bad with years. 2013. That is after
I was 13. I don't know what so I'm now 36 now. So that was, 23 years ago. Yeah. So that's a long time ago.
So that was that before or after Steve Jobs came back?
I think Steve had come back then, and I think they were on the early versions of the iPod, the very, very early versions of the iPod. And that's what initially sparked my interests. It was 13, 14. And I remember walking into school with this device, and I've told this story a few times, that Microsoft had a product called Zune. I think it was called the Zune at the time. And I just loved everything, the simplicity and of the product, everything about it, the way it was designed. But then people only use Mac for creative design, essentially. It was like a very, non-standard thing. And I thought, this is just something I love. And, people generally laughed at me. And I was like, okay, but I love the product. And how do you I love a product and then adopt it and be part of that journey? And that was kind of the start of my investing career. So I think, I was listening to Magnus Carlsen's podcast last night, and, how his father, was a very keen chess player. And I think the combination of being competitive, I was always very competitive, plus having, my father who's in the investing world and the listed side, that combination, allowed for me to have a really interest in kind of both sides of the equation from a very young age. And that was a start. Fast forward a long time, I went to Durham University. I studied international business there. Very, loved it, and went to do the blue chip thing, which was going to EY, technology management consulting. Some great lessons, life lessons there. It wasn't always for me, I would say. I was always an entrepreneur inside. So I left, and I did a number of things. I ended up, I would say, almost incubating some companies now. Some of those companies were an absolute disaster. So one of them went on to sell to private equity, and that was kind of the evolution of Concept. After that, I felt that there was a real gap in the ecosystem for a pre-seed fund that was, very meaningful in terms of making a first check investment in Europe with nothing, because, I experienced that problem on those other journeys. And I just felt that there was a real bias in Europe to having products, having revenue, having and, I think you could see that from the landscape and the funds that have been raised, and that they're great and they're amazing, but there just wasn't this kind of conviction pre-seed fund. And we thought, that was something we can build, particularly with a very people focused lens. And so, over the last 7 years, we've been doing that. We, started off very small, really grafted in the early days. We're not spin outs from Sequoia and Index, and, and we just kept our craft going. And, I think, Kieran Hill, I don't know if you've had on the podcast, always used to say to me, never stop investing. That's kind of was one of our mentalities. And, the way we've kind of shaped over the years is 2 pillars: being exceptionally focused on people. So we have one of the deepest people processes that I think I know of any fund in the world. And that allows us to build conviction when others can't. And secondly, being obsessed with investing at the pre-seed stage. So nothing is ever too early for us. And those 2 pillars are kind of our guiding principles. And we've built on those many, many years. We now are going on to our second institutional fund. The first kind of 4 or 5 years, we were doing kind of SPBs, small funds, etc., testing the model. In 2022, we closed $65 million, which is our first institutional vehicle. And now we're going on to our kind of second institutional vehicle. And we've been lucky to partner with some amazing founders. And, I can talk about some of those journeys, and some of the stories I'm sure are interesting.
I got to ask you, I did a bit of a ChatGPT assisted calculation here. Do you know the value accretion of your stock on Apple from 2002?
I don't know, because I don't know. Also, I sold little bits over the years. So yeah, it's probably very high. It's more painful because the only thing I remember from that journey, is a long time ago, is the day Steve Jobs died, I sold all the rest of my holdings.
Oh, really?
Yes. And if you look at the chart, the day he died to the next 2-3 years, the value increase was almost the last 7 years or 8 years combined. I'm sure it's, don't quote me on that, but I'm sure it's something like that.
I can tell you, first of all, the sale of the stock when Steve passed away just proves that your people earned it.
Yeah,
so congrats
on
that. Yeah. You're at least you stick to your thesis. I can tell you that if you'd held on to your stock, it would have increased 1,117x.
Wow.
So that would
probably not as good as NVIDIA, but it's not bad.
yeah. Very, very cool. We should definitely talk both about the founder's journey, founder stories that you just described, and we should dive into also the people focus and how you, when you have such a good people process, what does that actually mean? And then the pre-seed obsession. I think there's a bunch we can dive into there as well. I do want to ask you, you're a 65 million fund,
Mm-hmm.
and you're coming up on the next one, which I'm sure will be at least the same size. Where do you feel, because many that are pure pre-seed would be smaller. So how do you reflect on that, and what's the portfolio model behind it that kind of explains why you're, in quotation marks, that?
Yeah, look, when we launched the fund, the last vehicle, again, we've always as a firm had this outside mentality. None of us have come from the blue chip landscape. We've all come from, the partners, we've all come from, all the rest of the team have come from outsiders mentalities. No one gave us a chance when we started this business, like nobody. And so when we launched that vehicle, it was a surprise to a lot of people in the ecosystem, because they said $65 million pre-seed. I think that's probably the biggest, definitely the biggest in the UK, if not Europe, in terms of just pre-seed. It was something new at the time. And what we realized is that to be a really good pre-seed investor, you need to have conviction when others don't. And I can give you tons of examples of people in our portfolio where that's the case. But to have that conviction, you can't be writing 200, 300K. You need to be like leading around with like $1 million, like off the gate. And the profile of founders in Europe, of the ecosystem has matured. And so to write $1 million with nothing in a round of 1.5, 2 million was like, there was very few percentage of people that could do that. And so I think when we started the fund, we thought our lead rate was going to be around 50%, maybe 60 at max. Our lead rate is actually 90% on this fund. And I think that is something which we've been shocked about. And the reason why people want us to lead is because that conviction obviously helped building the round, and not many people can have that conviction at such an early stage, and that's such a good vote of confidence. But the rounds allow founders at pre-seed to essentially, if they do really well, skip a round of dilution. So if you look at some of our best companies in our portfolio, if you take 11 Labs, you take Treefair, you take VSIM, all kind of companies we funded in the last 2-3 years, their next rounds have essentially been 20 million, 15 million, 20 million. So you skip your traditional 5 to 7 million seed round, which is almost like a round of dilution you've missed there.
Yeah. That
kind of thinking is really good for a pre-seed fund, because we're aligned. We're not a multi-stage fund building ownership, etc. So I think that product has resonated so much, because the vagueness that we operate in, people can't build conviction in the kind of the seed landscape or the multi-stage landscape, but we can. And that's why we end up leading, because most of the deals, people are like, this is weird, this is early, this is like, we haven't got anything, but there's not many people that write you $1 million off the gate. And so that's kind of our kind of core bread and butter.
You're saying many things that make me think, and I don't know exactly where to start. If we start by one common critique, and anyone that goes to your website or your slide deck will very quickly, and I call it slide deck, not pitch deck, because in your email you have a deck for founders specifically, not LPs, which I think is pretty cool, and it describes well who you are. But you're saying here a lot of critique of the VC ecosystem, and you also say, as part of your founding story, we know how difficult VCs can be. Big statement on your website. What do you have to say to those that say that there are too many VCs that are willing to write a lead ticket at the early stage, but not willing to write a co-invest ticket, but not willing to write a lead check?
Yeah.
Or even, do you think that there's a plethora of VCs that tell founders, go find a lead and come back, then we're in, and that is really, or doesn't mean that they're in, but they're saying that, then they're interested, which I think is sometimes sleight of hand, easy way to just get out of a conversation without saying anything real.
I mean, I could not agree with that more. I mean, that was our frustration in the early days when we weren't able to write those large tickets that, we had built conviction, but we could only write 100, 200K, and we would never come back to us when you get a lead. And I think that my experience of venture is that you have to be right, obviously, but you have to almost be like non-consensus right. If you look at the companies that have done well in inverted commas in our portfolio, like 11 Labs, everyone passed their pre-seed, like, and then we
When
could
did
go
you
into that
join?
story.
When did you join 11 Labs?
We were the first investors.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
well, congratulations. You just won the Emerging Manager of the Year award.
That's very kind. And yeah, look, I think it's not just that. I can tell, like, many other stories of our portfolio where that is the case. And even when people come from blue chip backgrounds, when their product is like in a weird market, or they haven't got something they can show, or it's not fully formed, it's very easy to go and find a lead, let someone else do it, and we could slide in 200-300 as a follower check or a tracker check, or we'll put 200 and we'll come and lead your next round. And like, that's fine. And some founders do like that, and there's lots of reasons to do that. But I think venture, for us, it's about, what's the craft of doing this job? For me, it's genuinely finding those outlier talented people that are often misunderstood, underlooked, underrepresented. To be clear, we aren't the fund that people come to when you're spinning out of DeepMind and raising 10 million off the gate. That's not us. Yeah. There's loads of other funds will do that. We're the kind of people that are, and the archetypes of people that we kind of typically invest in fall into kind of 3-4 categories, which are, your ex kind of operators, like you take Matty and Peter at 11, who are Palantir and Google. You take Ben and Quiver at Anam, who are a live avatar business, and they were at Synthesia and they spun out. And you get a bunch of our 30 to 40% of our portfolio, second time founders, typically sold their business under 100 million. So it's not like kind of the Daniel X of this world, or kind of your, younger, scrappy, maybe they've done a PhD kind of spin out, I would say. And if you look at the unicorn percentage in Europe, 80% come from that category. If you look at what VCs are doing at VC pre-seed, they're actually going after the kind of plus 100 million safe bets. They're not going after these categories of like people that are often underlooked. And so that's why A, we lead 90% of the time. B, our ownership and conviction level is, very, very consistent. We feel that is something that the market really, really, really likes.
How come, Reece, you are UK pre-seed, not Europe pre-seed?
The UK statistically is a really great place to build businesses. If you just look at the numbers, we're actually producing a report in the next few weeks. 65% of all capital pre-seed is based in the UK. I think UK has more unicorns from, I think it was 2018 to now, than France and Germany combined. And so the unicorn rate in the UK is probably around 5 companies a year, right? I don't know if that's a combination of bio and tech, etc. Our job as a fund is essentially per vintage, it's just essentially find one of those per cycle, right? Like that's kind of our job. And then our fund maths works out. And so being very embedded in a talent dense ecosystem, Sequoia did this great report around talent. And, it's like San Francisco, New York and London combined is like kind of the top 3 places for talent. I think that what I really noticed as I traveled to New York recently, great cities where people want to live, where there's talent density, quality of life, attracts great people and great, organizations, universities around them, etc. Allows for this flywheel. And we talk about the flywheel in venture, which I think Harry did a really good quote of, like, if you've had a unicorn in your first 3 years of your fund, you're like 85% likely to have 3 in your next fund. And I understand why that's the case, because that ecosystem is, of like having that, and that, that perception of that kind of flywheel going round and round is equally for cities as it is to people in venture. So I think being very embedded in one market and going deeper and deeper, we've seen that kind of perpetual flywheel. Now, I think if you look at most San Francisco funds, even European funds, from Creandum to Sequoia and NEA, London has been the place they set up their office, if it's their second market in Europe or their first market from the US. And I think that says a lot about the city and the density and, the platform that it has.
Now I'm just I'm curious, given the success you've had already and the networks you obviously act in, I would think that accessing and capturing talent across Europe wouldn't be too difficult. And I would think that limiting yourself to the UK would maybe not make that much sense given where you are already.
Yeah, look, I think that what we found with that is we are actually very European in the base. So you take Nick and Rapper, one of our portfolio companies, are capably UK, Spain. You took Matty and Peter, UK, Poland, and so I could go on. What I think typically happens is that London as a place, or the UK that has a node in Europe which allows you to unlock other places in Europe. Where I think is very difficult. We're not going to set up in France and start doing pre-seed deals when we know the market is completely cornered. It just doesn't make logical sense to us. But there's always 30% of that fund, which, in the next one, particularly, we will do more outside, and that's just through a network flywheel effect.
How, this is a provocative question, and
I love provocative questions.
Well, but it's maybe provocative in a different direction than towards you. I was about to ask you, how do you distinguish yourself from someone like Seedcamp? Because I imagine that you would be looking at many of the same deals.
Yeah, look, I think
coming in super early with strong commitment as well.
Yeah, look, I have a lot of respect for Seedcamp guys. Yeah. I know them, and they've been, done amazing things in the European ecosystem when there wasn't. So, I think where Seedcamp and us differ slightly is obviously they cover a much wider geography, which is I think testament to what they built as a fund and where they've had success in the UiPath, etc., and companies and across Europe. So I think that embedded nature is something that being focused here is helpful. And I think the second thing is I think the quantum of investments we do is a lot less. And so by doing that, typically, and I don't know always their model. So, I mean, we are co-investors with them and we have a great relationship with them. I think what we typically, again, in that lead position with a higher ownership stake in the companies. And that is just slightly a different model than the Seedcamp, which typically have a wider geography and typically I think we're very focused in being in rounds up to 2 million. I think given the nature of their brand and their portfolio and they can participate in much larger rounds at seed as well as pre-seed. So I think that's probably like the difference.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that you often also do work with Gil and David at Angular?
No, we haven't done any deals with. I mean, again, amazing respect for what they've done there, and we share an LP in common, and speak very highly of them. But yeah, nothing as to that effect. And again, I think just on the co-investment,
but you're
piece,
both on the lead route, and that's also why I thought maybe you have.
Yeah,
that's why I call it done a lot of work with them and not and not co-invested with them, because I think you would probably be more rivals than you and Seedcamp.
Yeah, so I think generally the way we structure our rounds is that there's ultimate flexibility for the founder. You can have 2 leads. There's enough ownership in most deals to do that. You can have a follower position. You can have us leading with angels. And I think that's what beauty of like what we're doing is we're very collaborative with everybody. We have a lot of co-investors and, we don't want to be that fund that's taking 20% ownership up front and just killing the rest of the round. We see the benefit of the ecosystem play.
Yeah. And then Reece, tell me, how do you think about verticals at the pre-seed? Does it make sense to be vertically oriented or having theses within specific verticals that you're paying extra attention to? Or do you think it's more, while it helps for the narrative, especially towards LPs, but in reality, pre-seed is so widespread what happens. You have to, obviously AI is a mega trend and that's going to permeate everything. But really, I don't know where the next big thing is. I double down on founders. I'm trying to be in the right circles, and that's where I hunt.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's multi-layered elements to that. At pre-seed, I think we did some analysis of all the kind of, Midas list funds at pre-seed seed in the US and the history of venture. And, all of our team are very big students of venture, which I think is really important in our industry. And I think if you look at all the funds that have done really, really well over the years, everyone's kind of first check investor, under 100 million generalist fund. And that's exactly what we are, and we're never going to deviate from that. And I think the thing is, our 80% of our decision is on people. And we have a very interesting way of looking at people. And I think that brings to light things that other people just don't see. And at the beginning, it's so weird. I mean, look at the great stories in venture, from Airbnb to Uber, and I could go on, and even the pivots like Slack, and so many different things, even in our portfolio. And the companies just change so much, but the people remain consistent. And I've always been a believer of, I'm never going to be able to predict the next wave at pre-seed. I'm just not going to be able to do that. The last deal we did was just the most random thing. I can't talk about it at the moment, but if I tell you, you'd be like, what is that? And people say the market's too small, the competition's too small, too much. And I think smart, intelligent people who spike in certain characteristics that we look for find those markets. And it is that kind of old, I think it's all I see thing. You need a product, which is the surfboard. You need a surfer, you need the wave. But we're really looking for the surfer, and they build the right surfboard, and then they go find the wave. It's kind of the way we look at it.
Okay, now I want to ask you another weird question. Well, not weird, but it's a peculiarity of your fund that I'm excited about and want to hear about. And that is, there are two guys with the same surname and an age difference.
Yes.
Is Jeff in your family?
Yes, Jeff is my father. And yeah, so that's something that is an interesting point of our partnership. And look, I think there's some great father-son partnerships over the years in venture. Local Globing,
Local Globe are incredible beacons there in Europe. I imagine, like, unwrap it a little bit for us.
Yes,
what's it like to do this with your dad?
Yes, it's actually great. The reason why is we're just incredibly different people. I'm much more focused on, kind of always being kind of a self-entrepreneur, always kind of, driving things forward in different ways. And he's been like the yin to my yang. He's, very focused on lots of different elements of the business. He's, amazing at kind of like amazing at strategic thinking in detail. He comes from a public markets background, so challenges a loss he doesn't get, and because he had, venture is very, especially the team, you can get very hyped up in like deals and people leading, and having that calmness of just being like, let's look at the facts, let's look at like the situations. And particularly as those companies grow, having someone with a public markets background and looked at things rationally and strategically, it's just amazing to balance out the team. And I think that's why LPs have liked that. And look, there's also one of the big things in venture is partnership risk, right? Partnerships blowing up, and I think having that continuity and also ability to understand how people are progressing through the firm and transitioning and legacy planning, super important. And just an interesting fact, just because a lot of people say you must agree with your Jeff like a lot. Me and him on voting records on investment committees have the most differing opinions. We looked at it and we said Jeff and Reece disagree the most, which I think is and the fact that I call him Jeff is also an interesting thing, because I have that very clear distinction between that. When he steps in the office, and we just don't. We have I'd say it was a great working relationship, and I think any of the team that you speak to on my side, I think it gives continuity and longevity to the firm.
I am sure my dad and I would also have very different voting track record. I want to double click on this perspective of having a public markets investor or someone with a public markets background, because it's actually something I've been wanting to do more on the podcast, is bring on more public markets investors, or at least people with that background, to kind of try and shine a little more light on the value of that at seed and the value of that at Series A and B and so on. I feel like this is probably one of the places where the US ecosystem and the European is very different, in that I think, from what I kind of hear, like just observing from the outside, I would definitely say that it seems like the average US investor has more public markets insight and understanding and so on than the average European.
Yeah, look, I think that's something probably I've observed. If you look at some of the great venture investors of all time, if you look at kind of, I don't know, Bill Gurley or Peter Fenton or like those, they've all kind of had investing careers in kind of started in public markets, technology, etc. And I think that having some kind of grounding in that, or having that in your team, is a very beneficial thing.
Tell me, how does it help you?
Okay, so I mean, venture is about power law, right? Every venture firm says to their LPs, if we hit a power law company, we've returned our fund. Great. So, having been lucky enough to experience something like that, you essentially look at your portfolio and say, hold on a second, 90% of our NAV is in one company. And then you look at all the decisions you're doing around you say, great, we could get another unicorn, but our job is to kind of manage that one thing for our investors. If you look at the fiduciary duty from an LP, we've got to be so understanding of the business fundamentals, where they're going, what decisions they're making. Should we sell? Should we not sell? Should we keep? Should we and to have a public market, because basically our power law scale, it's a public market company. Because if you look at the history of public markets, Amazon and all these companies went public at the companies that these companies are, valued at. And so to have someone, when you're doing, there's new funding rounds and, you look at the fundamentals of the business, and so, for example, 11's recent funding round, which is now public, is at 3.3 billion, and so, when that round was going through, Jeff said, this is the process to analyze this company. Let's backtest all of the growth rate of this company, look at the scenario analysis. Let's run it through an AI model. Let's actually look at the company in a public, forget that this VC is raising around, forget everything. Let's just look at the company like a public markets company. There's very few VC funds I know that would take that rational logic. They think, oh, this is one of the hottest companies in the world. It's an AI. It's just like, we didn't even discuss that. We just literally were like, he just ran that process and was like, this is how we need to think about this company at this point, at this scale, because I've done it for 30 years, basically. And that's basically why it's so beneficial, because, that is one of the most critical decisions you're going to make as a VC manager.
I want to ask you then, people process, you described that in the beginning, and it's really an underpinning of your firm. So let's dive into that as much as we can. Tell me, what does it mean when you say that you have an incredible people process, probably better than anyone else in the world? That's what everyone would say.
Yeah, of course.
So what is that process?
Yeah, look, I think it's something that's evolved over time, and we've gone on a very long evolution of it. I won't bore you with the evolution, but the way we look at it is that we have kind of 5-6 core principles that we look in individuals and teams, basically. So some of those I'll go through, and maybe we could dive deeper into like one or two of them. So something like team dynamics. So team dynamics is essentially one of the core fundamental parts of our pillars. So if we take like Matty and Peter, 11 childhood friends, we've got three husband and wife teams now as well. So I think what we really look for is that kind of ability to understand the dynamics between teams at a very high scale.
Do you think that your dad and yours relationship put you in a special position to underwrite family teams? Because
I think
I literally spoke about this with my wife last night, and I said, fuck, I would not dare do that with you.
Yeah, look, maybe that is the case, but I think what we're trying to do is 80 to 90% of VCs have this gut feel. We know they're a great founding team. We're great. What we're doing is, it's not a score. It's a framework where we build conviction. So the way the process works is the partners and the team as a whole have to build conviction in one of our spikes. So kind of our 5 spikes are evidence of exceptionalism, team dynamics, relentlessness, domain obsession, growth mindset. So the way we look at teams and individuals, and take a second-time founder, right? Let's take a second-time founder. So one of the spikes that we would really look for in a second-time founder is a growth mindset. The reason why that is the case is because we want to really know that they've learned and developed on that journey as a second-time founder. Because if you haven't, then you will not implement and execute those things. if you're, for example, someone spinning out of university, maybe we're looking for a very high spike in relentlessness, that kind of, I'm sleeping under my desk, I'm speaking to 50 customers, etc. So we have layered kind of three, and maybe people haven't known each other very long, maybe a couple of years. So we're looking for like in that kind of team dynamic spike, we really know our co-founder. We can complete each other's sentences. We interview them both separately. We give them our own people assessment about roles they do in organizations. So we layer all these kind of things, and we look for these high spikes. So Palantir, for example, I think look for spikes, and they're one of the best hiring organizations. We didn't know that when we spoke to them. They said, oh, we look for spikes in individuals. We've done, I think, 5 Palantir teams now, but that's kind of besides the point. But yeah, look, I think this allows us, because I think a lot of people think we have a score and it's like we must invest, but I think it's just much more nuanced than that. And the way we kind of lay that all in is 3 levels of research. So we have kind of academic research, which we've kind of gone off the shelf, and we're doing some partnerships with some universities as well to build on that and have some proprietary level. There's kind of market industry. So, speaking to like organizations who are great at hiring, and my colleague, Seon, spends a lot of time doing that as the head of people research. And that helps us inform the model. And there's our own research as well, which we've done too. So that constant feedback loop as a firm, we quarterly go to a quarterly kind of offsite, and we spend an hour or 2 looking at the model, looking at the deals we missed, looking at how we improve that model, that framework. And I think it's been a real kind of game changer for us in terms of the way we kind of execute and evaluate deals. And founders like it, because we go through 5-year increments of their life. And they're like, hold on a second, VCs don't talk to me about who I am and where I come from and what I've done. You're actually genuinely a person I want to work with. So that's also why our win rate is very high, because of that.
I came across just the other day an old Myers-Briggs report that was made on me by some employer back in the days. And I thought, I kind of smiled a bit to myself and thought, oh, what a group of idiots. Because I thought what I thought was, oh man, if someone is relying on that to gauge who I am, to kind of, and it was even done by an external consulting team, right?
Yes.
What's your take on that type of thing? Maybe I'm completely wrong.
No, look, I think there's a time and place for all of those things, and think they all have some merit. And we have looked at them and in detail over the years in many circumstances. And I think with all these things, it allows you to kind of maybe uncover some insights that you may have not thought of from a gut feel perspective. And I think that's the key. If you actually survey, I actually did a little survey of VCs actually a couple of months ago. And I think out of the 6 or 7 I kind of briefly touched about, this is kind of globally, I think 50% of them didn't even speak to the CTO of the company before investing, which I thought was bananas. And so, like the fact that the industry as a whole essentially relies 90% on kind of gut feel analysis without any kind of framework, but consistently says people are everything in this industry, is something that, was baffling to me as a pre-seed investor. Even more, look, Series A and B is completely different. Like it's like completely different. And so I think that those kind of assessments can be used in ways, but you need to have your own a framework essentially of like embedding that, and you need to understand what you're looking for with those assessments. There's definitely a place for them. And you can you can go to town on these things. You can give people scenario analysis. You can do, very specific types of interviews and questions, and you can even start bring psychologists in. You can go crazy, but I think that we've tested all these things over the years, and I think it's about, our mission. What is our mission as a firm? Is to solve the people equation. And the people equation is, if we solve it like the DNA equation, essentially we've unlocked the holy grail. We'll never get there. But to have that like mission of understanding that, and the way founders and having that kind of framework is something that like motivates us as a team every single day.
Do you know John from EUVC Ventures?
I know John. Yes, I know.
Yeah, he's big on people and framework thinking around that as well.
Yes, and I think I have a lot of respect for EUVC, and again, I think what I like about them is they cut the noise. They have their own opinions, and then they'll invest kind of like forgetting like this is a hype thing. They'll just be like, right, this is what we're looking for. And I have a lot of time for VC funds who are of that thinking, that make their own mind up.
Very cool. Okay, Reece, we have a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you here before we close, because you have such a strong positioning around being different from the rest of the ecosystem and taking a bit of a contrarian perspective, or at least a very honest or very hard-hitting critique of the problems in venture in general. I want to ask you, give me the 3, 5, however many you want, biggest critiques of where we are as an ecosystem today in terms of VC behavior, and feel free to go as deep as you want.
The three criticisms I have is something I've touched on before, which in the podcast, is that people not building their own conviction. So I think there's so much reliance in our industry on signaling. So they're signaling on brand, on founder, on CV investing, on so many things. And I get it. There's a lot of noise, so you need to cut through it. But having that conviction when other people don't is something that I think where true alpha is. And I think people just over-index on others generally. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is clarity of understanding what you are. So we're very clear, and I think it's taken us a long time to get there, of like, we are a pre-seed fund, we invest this much for this much, this is what we do. And look, I think VCs generally promise so much, and we don't. We're just like, these are the things we'll be good at, these are the things we won't be good at. Just be honest with people. And I think that's like something the industry kind of one-ups themselves on. Like, we have 50 people in our platform team, and we can do this and this, and just be like, we're great at these 3 things. Go and speak to all our founders and just stick to, so everything in life is 80-20, right? So like, just focus on the things that 20% that will, move the needle. And yeah, I think just like for years and years and years, we had our term sheet on our website, right? Now I see a lot of VCs saying, oh, we're putting our term sheet on our website, and it's like a new thing. And like, why is that? It's just so simple. Like, why can't you just be transparent and put it on the website? Like, and so that clarity of like understanding the process you're going through and the transparency at the end of it. Now, look, we're not perfect. We get lots of things wrong as well, and we're always learning. But I think, we're always trying to like understand where we can do better on all levels of the organization. But those are the 3. So summarize: 1 is a lack of conviction. 2 is a lack of kind of clarity around where you are in the process, and et cetera. And 3rd is the lack of conviction building when there isn't anything. So, I think in Europe, it's even more prevalent. When I travel to the US, I think, they have this mindset of like, yes. And I even lived there for a few months. And I think that, I think Europe is doing a great job of catching up on a lot of those things, but we're still, particularly at that kind of really early stage, very critical of ideas. And, there's more skepticism than I would like at times.
Do you think that is a feature? So yes, in a way, is that a feature of, I think that maybe it is a bit of a feature of our ecosystem rather than a bug. And I say that because our exits are a bit different from the size of the exits in the US. And for that reason, the return profile becomes different of the funds. And then you start having a bit more focus on risk minimization, downside minimization. Do you think that might be the cause of it?
I think there's been some amazing funds in Europe who have made some amazing returns, and and some of the stuff is very public. Like you take something like Hummingbird or many others that I can name, and they've had consistently great returns and big outcomes. You look at the UiPath, the Spotify's, the Klarna now, etc. 11, and I think that the ecosystem has matured a lot, and I think this concept of having the $1 trillion European company is something that will happen in time. And I think that the conservatism I witness is the comment I get back the most of people that we are backing is like, yeah, I really like that person, but the idea I don't understand, the market I don't know, I don't understand, it's too small, they're doing something a bit weird. And so if you take that lens, and then that is the problem, I think. So people know they're good people. They kind of know they're smart. They've even been second time, third time founders in, many cases, and they backed them before. And when you call them up, you said, yeah, they did everything right, sold the business well, we made a good return, but yeah, they're just doing something really weird. And I can't get that through my investment committee because we need to write a 65-page memo at pre-seed about this market, and there is no market. So I'm like, okay, like, kind of, isn't that our job? Like, at some level, like, to understand that these people create markets, and like, this is bit weird, and I think that is the difference, right? Because everyone needs to answer to something, and the structural problem of European VCs, what I've seen it, is that a lot of pre-seed funds, pre-seed rounds are people that haven't invested at pre-seed. They're like seed or A funds who have like writing a pre-seed check, and you need to write this huge memo. You need to get 10 partners on board, and that's just not how it works. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest gap I see in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think we have a structure with oftentimes a lot of power given to ICs rather than the individual partners. And
correct.
I often do not like that when I see it, because I really want to be backing singular people. And then, okay, they take it through IC, they do talk to the rest of the team. I obviously want that. But really, I want the partners to be incredibly thoughtful in their own space, and then that's who also leads the deal and does the main work. And then the rest of the group is there to pressure test. I think that's the best approach in 99% of the cases to avoid exactly the behavior you're describing. Reece, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm so happy this was the first hour we spent together.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Andreas.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.